Next up, I'm very excited to have Rachel from Newscorp telling us about what they do over there. So, as you guys know, if you've been here, we try to have people coming from a bunch of different horizons, startups, VCs, also large companies, and just the fact that Newscorp hired Rachel, who's a prominent data science person here in New York, speaks volumes about how forward-thinking they are. So excited to hear about the details. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks for having me here today. I'm Rachel Schutt. I'm the Chief Data Scientist at Newscorp, and I wanted to tell you about data science at Newscorp, which I think has at least two interesting dimensions to it that I wanted to talk to you about. The first is that when I think about data science and how it's evolved as a career path over the last few years, it started at companies such as Google, Facebook, and LinkedIn, which are inherently data companies where their business models are built around data products. And then I'd say data science started to evolve to hiring data scientists at startups, which are often interesting, but they don't always have very much data, almost by definition, to start out with. And so I think now data science is starting to move to these more traditional companies, such as Newscorp, where I work now, where I believe that actually some of the most interesting challenges for data scientists exist. Because both organizationally and technically there are interesting data problems. So that's the first reason why I think it's sort of an interesting dimension of data science at Newscorp, which I want to explore today. And the second is that there are just many interesting and challenging problems at the intersection of journalism and data, which I think make a really compelling place to work. So I think the broader message here is that some of the most interesting data problems now are at traditional companies, and specifically because journalism is important for society, there are just interesting questions and challenges around the future of journalism where I think data and technology can play a large part. So I wanted to talk about me. Just to give you a little background, I got my PhD in statistics at Columbia. Prior to that, I did a bunch of stuff which is not really directly relevant to today, except that I did consulting in Silicon Valley during the dot-com era. And I taught high school math, and I wrote some math books for kids. After my PhD in statistics, I worked at Google for a few years, where I started to gain a perspective on data science because I was a classically trained statistician in an environment of computer scientists and software engineers. And so based on that, I proposed and taught a class at Columbia University, which is called Introduction to Data Science, because I felt it was important for students to start getting more of a taste of what was actually required of them in order to get jobs in the data science community, and I didn't feel that that was really being done at the universities, that they fell short in teaching students in ways that actually helped them thrive. So I taught this class, and it was actually based on a lot of lectures that were given by data scientists in the community, and as a result of that, that turned into this book that I co-authored called Doing Data Science. My co-author was Kathy O'Neill, who is a blogger, a math babe, who was actually here as a panelist last year. And so that book came out in October, and that's also when I started around then at Newscorp. I want to tell you a bit about Newscorp because I don't know what people know, just so you understand what the operating environment is. News Corporation was founded by Rupert Murdoch in 1979, and it included the entertainment, media, broadcasting, publishing, and journalism companies. And then last year, almost exactly a year ago in June, the News Corporation was split into two companies. The first was 21st Century Fox, which includes the entertainment and broadcasting arms. And the second is News Corp, which is where I work now, which includes the publishing and journalism. So, for example, we have Dow Jones, which owns the Wall Street Journal. We have the New York Post. News UK includes the Times of London, and the Sun. News Corp Australia, there's tons of newspapers, including from the major cities, as well as lots of local newspapers. News America Marketing is actually a couponing company. HarperCollins is books. Amplify is an education company, and Storyful is related to video, social. And so previously, each of the companies sort of ran themselves autonomously, and News Corporation had been more of a holding company. And then with the creation of the new News Corp, a strategic decision was made to leverage the network of these companies so that they could share best practices and start doing shared technology and shared platforms. And so the CEO of News Corp, whose name is Robert Thompson, promised that the new company would try to cultivate a startup sensibility, even though we already work for the world's, as he said, most established and prestigious diversified media and information services company. And so he's emphasized, so we're moved away from being a holding company and we're emphasizing to a company headquarters that emphasizes building new business models around its properties and content and trying to leverage synergies across the businesses. And so they've hired experts in technology, data, product, business development, and strategy, and so on. So this visual was created at an innovation workshop around the future of the new News Corp. So this was like before the actual split, which happened in June, and before I started. And part of the outcome of that workshop was that data was going to be at the heart of our future. And essentially my position came out of this workshop and came out of the desire to make data the heart of the future. So essentially, that's what my job is to make that a reality. And so my new position is a new position, which has a global remit to try to establish and run the data strategy across all the business units and build a data capability across all the business units. I just want to say that technology is a big pillar as well. So my position is I work for the CTO. The CTO is my boss, and my peers on his team include platforms and product experts. And so this isn't a traditional IT department. The CTO is running, rather it's around digital innovation and innovation around platforms and data. And so I think there are multiple components to what a data strategy has to be. It's from everything around how data is used across the businesses and in making decisions, from the executives to every employee, including the journalists and the editors in the newsroom. And it's also to building data directly into the products themselves. It's about building internal capabilities with respect to hiring and creating processes to transform the culture so that it's a data culture, essentially. So I believe that probably 20 years ago, there were probably similar debates around embracing technology and needing a technology strategy and hiring CTOs and how to make technology a core part of the DNA. And obviously, at the News Corp companies, journalism has been a part of these individual businesses for, in some cases, hundreds of years. And so now there's this need to try to build data into the DNA of the company. And so I work very closely with Simon Smith, who's my peer. He's the SVP of platforms, and we both have backgrounds from Google, so we've sort of have similar philosophies about bringing the Google tech stack to News Corp. I'd say that some of the sort of key aspects of our approach are that we believe in investing in people rather than tools, and so we use open source tools, but also we try to build cross-functional teams of doers and implementers, meaning people who don't sort of just sit around hypothesizing or like telling other people what to do. We want people on our teams who can actually write code themselves, and so the data scientists have to know how to code, the data engineers have to know how to code, the designers code, and also sort of outside the teams that are explicitly dedicated to data science, there's just an effort to create a data culture with all the stakeholders and the whole business, around the business, and so interacting with them and changing how they've traditionally interacted with data teams. So we believe that we need to bring the best-in-class data tech stack to the organization. Sometimes that involves working with outside vendors. Sometimes that involves internal. Like I said, everyone on the team should know how to code, and we believe in creating data products as opposed to sort of static reports that have sort of gone out ad nauseum, like thousands of reports just telling people stuff that they now ignore. Our values are to be agile, fast-moving, to focus on business results, and to try to create a collaborative environment with our stakeholders. And we have also tried to adopt a design ethos, so using visuals to tell stories, to communicate. And that's why we hire designers onto the data science teams. I guess, like any big company with multiple touch points, there's a lot of data. In some cases, more traditional data from the billing and call center and the customer service type data to the higher volume web and social style data. And so it's one of the things that's slightly different than a lot of other places. It's not just transactional data that we have. Our content is also data. The text is data. Comments that we get from our users about our content is data. And so, so one dimension to consider all this from is from the dimension of size, which we're all familiar with big data. So one of the challenges, of course, is with respect to the size and the volume of the data. Another dimension to consider it from is just how rich is it? How rich is it in terms of, like, for example, the geolocation data? But I think another is just the meaning in the data is another dimension. And there's just deep, rich meaning buried inside a lot of our content. And so correspondingly, we have to use appropriate processes such as natural language processing. So we have many varied techniques that we use. So it's not just about logs analysis. It's not just about natural language processing. It's not just about big data. It's about the synergies that exist between all these methods and trying to create value from the data using the appropriate methods. And so a big part of the role is just trying to figure out how to turn this into value for business value. So as you know, it's not that, I mean, separately, these are sort of interesting data sources alone, or could be, but it's also the ability to join across data sources and the interactions. So just as a simple example, if you can take how a user is interacting with the website and join that with subscription data, you can build a churn model, which is much more rich in predicting than you might otherwise. Another thing to keep in mind is that most of our, most systems produce logs data. And so just one of the first things we do when we talk to any of the companies, and we talk to the people in the company who are in charge of the business systems about what data they have and what data we can have access to. They often speak in terms of cubes and enterprise data warehouses. And so we want to get to the raw logs and often get initial pushback because they want to know, why do you want to deal with the messy logs when we have these sort of nice, clean data warehouses? And so part of it is that the traditional databases are just snapshots in time, and a lot of interesting patterns in the data are getting lost when you roll up into these traditional reporting systems or reporting cubes. And so when we encounter these internal data warehousing teams, we're striving to be quite subtle, well, in some ways it's subtly different to some people, but it's actually quite substantially different for us. That when we're encountering these more traditional data warehousing teams, a traditional data warehouse project involves sort of lots of work to enforce order on a rather chaotic system, and it's just a never-ending task of trying to create this perfect final data cube. And instead, our approach has been more tactical, where we're more comfortable in dealing in the chaos and in dealing in these raw logs at the log level. So we process what we need in order to process to solve the problem we need to solve in the moment. Either it's a specific business question or to build a specific data pipeline. And so we find this as both pragmatic, and it also avoids the problem that you're not prepared to go back to the original source, or you potentially lose key signals if you don't have the original source around. And so this, I think, is sort of a philosophical difference or shift in some ways. So this philosophy or approach around logs is just one component of what I have called to myself the data science process. I've emphasized sort of this logs-based approach because it's an oft-quoted reality of being a data scientist or part of a data team, that you have to spend a lot of time and effort around collecting data and getting into good shape and create value from it, but that's only just one piece of the work that we have to do. I guess I'd like to highlight that being a data scientist is a highly iterative process. I've tried to express this in a general enough way so that a variety of types of problems map to it. And so whether it's that you're building a churn model or recommendation system or ad segmentation, you're kind of going through this same process from going from the same original raw logs and the same underlying data potentially, but then going through this. I think one of the things I want to emphasize is that I think one of the things that's been unique about the sort of data science revolution or whatever, is that there's this dichotomy, or at least there's at least two main branches of the types of output you're trying to achieve when you're doing these machine learning algorithms or statistical models. They're sort of the more traditional approach where you're trying to communicate or report your findings or help key stakeholders in the business make decisions. But then there's this sort of new angle where we're actually, the data or the algorithms are getting built back into the product themselves, and the logic and the data is the raw material of the product, which then gets integrated back into the real world where the users are interacting with that product, and then there's this feedback loop that's going on. And so you have to be making sure that you're measuring the effect of the product that you're creating and the impact that you're having on those users and take that into account in your modeling. And so, I think the remit of any team is to do both these aspects. Just some examples of the problems our team works on include, or the teams around the business work on, are some of the more traditional things like propensity and churn models. And at first, these tend to be more exploratory or one-off reports, or one-off reports or analyses, but then eventually they turn into something automated with signals that are algorithmically built back into the business systems. So we're building teams of data scientists, data engineers, and designers. These visualizations are just showing ways that users are flowing through some of our various products on web, iPhone, iPad, where the nodes represent pieces of content, and then the transitions between the nodes just represent the users transitioning and going from one piece of content to the next. And this was helpful for editors and product managers to just sort of understand how the users were using the product. I can't talk in a lot of depth about this data, but if you decide that you want to apply to work for us, then you can learn more. I suppose, as I mentioned in the beginning, I wanted to emphasize that, both that I think that there are two key things. One is that these more traditional companies actually have tons of data and tons of interesting problems, and the second was just about the interesting intersection between data and journalism. I think that journalism is an important aspect of society and that data and technology are part of the future of it, and so that's one of the main things that excites me about working for News Corp. So I'd say one observation is that I haven't experienced a separation of church and state that I expected to experience between the newsroom and the business. That the newsroom, especially where I've been spending a lot of time at the Wall Street Journal recently, have been really extremely open about collaborating with the data science and engineering team at Dow Jones, because Wall Street Journal is part of Dow Jones. I think that data scientists have a lot to learn from journalists in terms of curiosity, storytelling, learning how to tell stories with data. And so I'm excited about the opportunities that exist at News Corp to create sort of shared knowledge and help influence each other. So if we consider the newsroom alone, setting aside the business side for a second of the types of problems I think are there, I'd separate also within the newsroom types of problems that are sort of the day-to-day running of the newsroom. So there's a lot of decision making that needs to be made, and in many cases they want to make data-driven decisions. There's a lot of appetite to use data to help make decisions, to find out how particular pieces of content are doing, and to make appropriate decisions around that. This is different, qualitatively different from sort of embedding a data scientist in an investigative journalism team where they can help. So for example, deal with a large corpus of data. For example, if the NSA archive came in and you want to help the journalist tell a story. So there's opportunities that exist to do both things, both with on the decision-making side and the day-to-day operations of the newsroom, as well as the content and creation side, including both investigative journalism, but then also around infographics and visualization. And then I'd say outside the newsroom, there are also some more standard business problems that are not necessarily unique to News Corp's business, including things like retention and acquisition, and also around the optimization of the paywall model. And there's just also larger, deeper questions, I think, around the future of the news, both from a product and strategy perspective, as well as building longer-term sustainable business model for the journalism in the age of the digital age, when it's traditionally been a print business and it's trying to adapt to that change. So, so we're hiring, and happy to take any questions.
Yeah, wonderful, thank you. So we have time for just one quick question. Okay. You have the advantage of being right here. I'm lazy, so.
Elliot Nolmont, Garrett Asset Management. Given today's conviction of Coulson on the phone hacking scandal,
Yeah.
do you have a compliance function, and are there mechanisms in place to monitor the origins of data, and do you have a group that actually does compliance and legal as part of your group or part of that works with you?
Yes, we do. Those were from before I worked at Newscorp, and I'd say there's a distinction between sort of the compliance around the data itself and what you're referring to. It's also, I'd rather not comment further.
Okay, and I hate to say this because you just said that, but we actually way over the 20 minutes that were allocated for this. This was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Sure, thanks.